No.
Okay, and we're recording now. Okay, thank you, Lawrence and Les, for coming on the channel. Les Unite is the founder of the Voluntary Human Extinction movement, and Lawrence Anton is the co-founder of the new organization Anti-natalism International. Do either of you want to expand more on who you are for people who may not be familiar with your work?
Do you want to go first, Les?
Okay. Yeah, I am a volunteer with the Voluntary Human Extinction movement. I call myself the finder rather than the founder because it was here all along. And thanks to somebody who was just interviewed on the Friendly Antinatalist, Exploring Antinatalism, I have found that there was somebody in 1894 who came up with exactly the same idea. So that person now is the founder, but they wrote in a obscure script in German and it hasn't been translated, and so
Oh, do you recall the name?
Dr. Koenig,
Okay.
Koenig, I believe. Yeah, he wrote in French and German, I think, or maybe just German, but it hasn't been translated yet. I'm sorry, I can't remember. Akim, do you remember Lawrence? He was
Akima
interviewed.
Kurma?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh.
did you? What was that, Mark?
Akima Kurma?
Yes, that's what it was.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Really enjoyed his interview. So so full of information and so logical. So I got carried away, Lawrence. Sorry.
No. Yeah. So I'm Lawrence. I'm not really the finder of anything, but I've been a animal rights activist for like 3.5 years, and an antinatalist for around the same time. And I guess I only sort of started engaging with anyone else really who sort of thought about procreation in that way within the last year. And since starting to engage with people, I sort of stumbled into helping found Anti-natalism International, or I just call it Annie for short. But yeah, that's me.
Cool, thank you. So, yeah, I wanted to get you both together because on the podcast episode that we had with you, Lawrence, we did talk about the voluntary human extinction movement, and that there's some disagreement about your position personally, and I wanted to explore that. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities in our philosophies, but yeah, I guess I don't know how to. Do you want to explain your view on the VHEMT, and we can go. We could explore some more about that.
Yeah. Well, one slight it's not a preface or a disclaimer or anything. It's like a one slight like add-on that I just want to make or whatever before I start, is that I want to make a distinction between the voluntary human extinction movement specifically, and just the general idea of humans going extinct on their own, and sort of, not sort of, I don't know how you may want to put it, like tampering or getting involved with sort of other species and stuff like that. And the reason I want to make that distinction is because whilst VHEMT is a movement, there are like specific people associated with it, and when I sort of comment on the philosophy, I don't want to seem like I'm commenting about the individual people or anything like that. It's just the ideas. So with that sort of, I mean, maybe that's a caveat, maybe that was the word I was looking for. But anyway, so with that said, I can just lay out generally my thoughts on the topic. So the way I see it, there may be other things, but the way I see it is there are sort of three basic things that are true all at the same time. The first one is that many of the species that we share this planet with are sentient and possess the necessary anatomy to experience pain and to suffer, by and large, in the same way that humans do. The second thing is that the environment that these non-human animals exist in many ways, it's inextricably linked with the causation of suffering, and this may be through just the existence of the elements, like, you know, earth, wind, and fire, other life forms, or other species, like or other kingdoms, more like plants, fungi, bacteria, viruses, and also to each other. Non-human animals harm each other as well. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, if humans go extinct, as far as we know, if humans go extinct, we are going to leave those two true things behind without us, until, you know, the heat death of the universe or some other sort of unpredicted ultimate extinction event, something like that. And so my basic position is that I have no idea how we'd go about it, but I feel like it is the duty of humans to act as somewhat of a guardian over other species, to look out for their interests and ensure that that doesn't happen. And if we cause ourselves to go extinct, we sort of leave the universe behind without, and all the other sentient beings in it, without any sort of any other species with sort of cognitive capacity to do that sort of moral reasoning and look out for the interests of others. So that's it in short. I mean, I could expand on it, but I didn't want to like take up too much time.
Sure. Yeah. We do have the potential for caring for other species and for each other, unlike a lot of other species. But I think we need to make a distinction between the lives that we are responsible for and the lives that were already here before we evolved into Homo sapiens. Like right now, 60% of the mammals on the planet are our livestock. And we represent 36% of the mammals. So 96% of mammals, I'm just using mammals because mammals have such a well-developed limbic system, so they can suffer emotionally as well as physically. So 96% of mammals would not be here if we phased ourselves out and phased them out as well. Now, that would leave the other 4% of wild mammals, if they're still around by the time we go extinct, which is questionable. And 70% of the birds are our farmed poultry. And so that 70% of birds, which are suffering because of us, would not exist either. So, and of course, the 7.8 billion, or whenever we go extinct, would not exist either. And you know, we actually torture each other, and we kill each other at 7 times the average mammal killing each other for territory and mates and so on. So we're really kind of a killer ape. We do have the potential for a lot of wonderful things, but we don't seem to be on track to achieve it. And in the meantime, we are causing an extinction of perhaps 1 million other species, which for an ephalus, that may not be a bad thing. It's just that it's only the species that we randomly make go extinct. It's not like I don't think we could select which ones should. Well, I just said that the non-human animals that are domesticated by us, I think we should phase out, including our companion animals. You know, when we're gone, they won't fare as well, and maybe wouldn't fit into the ecosystem. Some might, you know. So the idea that I am putting forth is that if we take care of all of the suffering that we are responsible for, that's a hell of a lot of suffering that will no longer exist when we go extinct. You're right. Suffering will continue on as it did before we arrived.
So the first thing I would say is I found it really interesting when you said that humans sort of kill or hurt each other. I think it was 7 or 8 times the rate of other species. I didn't realize it would be that low. I thought we'd be way higher. Because in my mind, humans are just such a violent species, and because we go to war on such large scales, I thought it would be higher. But I was amazed that it was only 7 to 8
of mammals. 7 times the average mammal. So there could be other species that kill each other at a higher rate. I don't know, but
okay. And the other thing was, so you were saying if at the moment humans have sort of manipulated the environment and manipulated other species so that we've domesticated certain species and then we've bred them so that they take up a large percentage of the mammals that are on Earth, and specifically the species that have the more advanced capacity to suffer in emotional ways as well as physical ways, which is true. I used to do some talks. I used to go around universities and give talks, and I would talk about that as well. But the thing that came to my mind when I was actually giving the talks, and also it came to my mind again when you were speaking there, is that it is true if humans phased ourselves out, the domesticated animals that we brought into existence would also phase out, and so that is less suffering. But the wild animals that remain, whilst they're 4% now, if humans cease to exist and our over time our cities and societies will crumble down, it will be reclaimed by nature, and that 4% will eventually grow and take back the land, and nature will rewild itself.
Right. That's right.
And it may never get to the point where the suffering was as intense as, say, it is on a factory farm at the moment, but nature will begin to take over and reclaim human society, and with that will come a lot of wild animal suffering. The other thing that I wanted to say as well is that I do understand your point about making a distinction between the beings that we're sort of directly responsible for and beings that we're maybe not directly responsible for. And I think the distinction there is, the beings that we brought into existence. So, each other, but also domesticated animals. And then the sort of the beings that we're not as responsible for, the beings that were around before we even came about. So, wolves or bears or gazelles, etc., etc. And I do understand that distinction, but at the same time, whether or not you make that distinction, the two set of groups basically have the same interests. It doesn't matter whether a pig is domesticated, or if we go back way back when to when it was the species that we first manipulated it from, which I don't know the name of. Maybe it was some sort of warthog or something like that. But fundamentally, the two individuals, whether wild or domestic, still have the same interests. And whilst we may not be responsible for the creation of the interests on the part of the wild animal, we still observe their interests and observe that actually their best interests aren't being served in nature. And given that we are here and we have the capacity, well, we don't really have much capacity at the moment, but in the future we can work to have more capacity to try and remedy that. I feel like we have somewhat of an obligation. Maybe it's somewhat of a simple analogy, and maybe you'll completely blow it out of the water. But I imagine it as if, like, imagine you're on a walk in a forest, and you are walking down a path, and there's a lake, and there's a child, struggling in the lake. If you're observing what's going on there and the suffering that's going on, and you have the capacity to do something about it, I feel like humans are somewhat obliged. If the child in the lake were wild animals suffering in the wild, we're somewhat obliged to go over and try and help as best we can the individuals that are struggling. We didn't push them into the lake. They were already in the lake when we got here. But given that we observe what they're going through, and we do have the capacity, and we know that if we leave, no one else is going to have the capacity to save them, I feel like we're somewhat obliged to go over and at least offer as much help as we can. And again, maybe the plight and the suffering of wild animals is something that humans can't solve ultimately, because at the moment it's still very much just a philosophical thing that we muse over in our armchairs.
Sure.
But even if we can't fully solve it, we can at least try a good degree. And I feel like phasing humans out without first trying to address that would somewhat be a disservice to ethics, I would say.
Yes, I see what you mean. And so we are in agreement up to a point. And that point is the difference between animals that we have brought into existence or domesticated in some cases, and animals in the wild world. We are causing the extinction of so many of those animals in the wild world. In a sense, we are taking care of that. They don't suffer when they don't exist. But I don't think that we can understand well enough ecosystems, the Earth's biosphere, and so on, in order to manipulate it in a proper way. For example, we don't like suffering. We think suffering is bad. That is a human decision, and I think we're probably right about that. Suffering is bad, and we should try to eliminate what we're responsible for. But pain, suffering, fear, all of these things are what drove evolution to create all of these species, the coevolution of predator and prey. The gazelle got fast because the lion got faster, and in some cases the predator becomes a super predator and is able to wipe out all their prey because they're so good at it, and of course then they go extinct. In our case, we are a super predator that eats just about anything, so it's going to be a while before we go extinct due to our lack of prey. But I think we don't know enough to decide which species, how to help species, basically, wild species, I should say, what's good for them. We don't even know what's good for ourselves. So I see it as a lack of, not a lack of wanting to help. We do want to help. Well, there's a lot of wildlife rehabilitation, restoration of habitat for releasing species back into the wild, and that doesn't stop them from suffering. In fact, maybe they were suffering less when they were in the rehabilitation zoo. I don't know. And of course, our domesticated cats, when they go feral, have a very miserable life, and it's a short life too, in addition to their predatory nature, taking care of a lot of wildlife. So wherever we have, I guess I could call it interfered, bringing in exotic species in order to, bring in cane toads to eat the grubs in Australia, and on and on. We very rarely have done it right. And I don't think that we are to the point where we could do it right. But as you say, it is philosophical. I'm never going to see the day that all humans voluntarily stop procreating. And we're never going to see the day that we can figure out a way to eliminate all life on Earth so that it doesn't evolve into a suffering being again. That would require pretty much blowing up the planet because of the extremophiles living down in the vents of the ocean volcanoes and so on. So both of our desires are impossible. So they're more philosophical than anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it somewhat makes me laugh because we're both. I mean, maybe this is the nature of philosophy in many ways, but we're both sat here talking about things that are probably never going to happen.
Right, impossible.
At least we can try and address them in our head.
Yes.
Mark, I just saw you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something?
No, please keep going if you have.
Cool. Yeah. I was just going to say one quick thing, and then I'll hand it over to you. The only quick thing I was going to say is that I completely agree with Les that at the moment humans are completely ill-equipped to go about the task of trying to reduce wild animal suffering. There may be a few things that we would be able to do to ease it somewhat at the moment with our current sort of knowledge and level of technology. But I don't think to any significant degree. And so I agree with Les on that point. The only thing that I would say, and I'll say it quickly so that Mark can talk, is that if we do put a concerted effort towards phasing just humans out, we will put a full stop in the research that we could do to preventing the suffering of wild animals. And so I feel like if we at least try to frame our conversations towards, we are against human procreation, but to a point, we need to bear in mind the interests of others and research that whilst we're sort of considering the ethics of our own existence, so that we don't go out of existence so quickly and leave everyone else behind. And maybe when I say leave everyone else behind, I'm sort of framing it in my own way, and it's maybe a bit unfair because other people see it differently. But yeah, that was the only thing I had to reply with. So I didn't know if Mark, if
I think there are enough of us that we don't need to worry about if we phase ourselves out, it's going to take so long.
Yeah,
surely we can figure it out if we're going to figure it out before we went extinct. And maybe we'll arrive at a position that decides, well, maybe we should just let evolution take its course as it did before we came along.
No, I do agree that whatever happens, it's going to take a long time for
right.
unless there's some sort of global war or something just comes randomly out of nowhere and causes us all to go extinct. It's going to take a while. Yeah.
Right. So I had a question for you. The from your worldview, your perspective, do you see?
Is this for Les or me?
It's for Les.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right? Is my audio okay?
Yes.
Okay. Les, when I talk to Chris and Nina, and the other people that are kind of on the thread of environmental antinatalism, the conception of nature seems to be quite different than what antinatalists or ethicists perceive nature. Insofar as suffering is something that we can't fully understand, that it is a tool for evolution, and that there's a type of good thing that happens when the environment is in a healthy state of affairs. What is your view on wild animal suffering, the nature of being without humans? Like, do you see that as a good thing that if we were gone, that all these things would continue to I don't want to poison the question too much, but this is the kind of a point of contention, at least philosophically, between what I see and what I've heard some environmentalists talk about. And so I was curious about your view of the state of nature and What do you see that as?
Yes, I see what you mean. I think, excuse me, I think it goes back to the idea that we are not capable of figuring out what's best for the natural world. And wherever we go away and just leave it alone, it slowly but surely becomes what it was, or as best it can. Like Chernobyl, bears come back, wild boars, and so on. And a whole ecosystem is developing just by our absence. And for us to look at that and decide whether it's good or bad or shouldn't be or should not is sort of similar to the colonists deciding what's best for primitive, so-called uncivilized people, and coming in and fixing their solutions, their problems with our solutions. So I think it's that we don't have the what's the word for authority? I don't know if that's the right word. It's none of our business, I think, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, when it comes to responsibility or what rights do we have to interfere, I can understand that.
Yeah.
But the prescription or the description of the suffering of others. So, for example, if we're talking about, say, another human tribe that's uninterfered, what right do we have to interfere? But I think I could make a moral judgment, or at least a description of their reality, if they are torturing each other, or if they have an unjust society, or if they have, I feel like there are some things objectively we could say, or at least universalize, to be able to say that this is bad. And if I extend that other animals, some animals are persons, then surely I could say that the starvation or the being eaten alive probably isn't in the interest of that animal in particular. It could be for the environment, but right. The individual, I think I could, without saying that I should interfere or that I should fix it, could I just make that descriptive claim that being eaten alive, or starvation, or predation, or getting viruses or rabies or whatever, would be a harm to that individual animal?
Yeah, I'm sure if you asked them, they would say, yeah, I don't like having my ass eaten out while I'm still alive. Oh.
And so to extend that to other, like, more wildlife suffering, right? So the way that I see the environment and wildlife is that it's a bigger type of factory farming in a weird way. It's a thresher of just this carnage and gladiator war that just continues to perpetuate. I am very pessimistic. I don't actually agree. I know I get guilt by association with atheists and people that believe that you should intervene. I do believe that there are some environmental interventions that we have done that have helped the environment. And I think if we have sufficient knowledge of how some ecosystems work, and there are some things that we can do to alleviate some suffering, that's fine. Because we're cohabitating with certain animals, right? But at the same time, when it comes to, say, total extinction, to me, there's a weird conflict of philosophies where antinatalists are usually seen as philosophical pessimists. But at the same time, I feel it's kind of optimistic to hope for a utopia of total annihilation by our hands. But that aside, I sympathize with the description of reality, that this is a terrible place. And it would be better if no sentient life was here. I'm not saying that we should do anything about it, because we would probably mess it up or make it even worse and perpetuate more suffering. Right. But can we at least agree on that first premise, that the nature of reality as it is? And is there any confliction of what I just said with your philosophy, Lawrence? So what do you think about that, Les? And yeah.
Oh, so I'll let Les go first.
I think when it comes to us deciding there are universals within the human family, we can and have decided that slavery is wrong, and have put pressure on other groups to stop doing it. And same with FGM and some other child marriages and these things that we as humans can say, look, this is wrong. We want to put a stop to it, and we'll help you put a stop to it. But I think that's a whole different realm than the natural world, where we want to make sure that the zebra is fully dead before the lion starts eating it. Maybe we could do some genetic manipulation on lions so that they had a sense of whether their prey was still alive or not. But it's pretty far-fetched. As far as us doing beneficial things for the natural world, I think all of those are us undoing what previous humans have done.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But we still have that responsibility, right, to undo the harm. Yeah.
Yes, as best we can, because we're pretty ignorant.
But okay, maybe I'm missing it. But like, Les, your perspective of the natural world, do you see it as a positive or just a neutral stance, or do you see it as I see it, as a hellish kind of existence?
Oh, I don't see it as hellish. No, for the most part, it's not. We like to. I don't know we like to, but we do notice the hellish part, because that's we're more sensitive to, and we say, the whole thing is full of suffering and so on. There is a lot of suffering in there, but there's also just a lot of just basic eat, excrete, mate, have fun, even in a lot of cases.
So would you say that the natural world is a net positive?
No, I think it just is.
Okay.
Like evolution, it just is. It isn't necessarily what we could call good or bad. When humans are gone, there will be nobody to make that distinction. And so that's a purely human thing to say it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Lawrence, do you have any input there?
Yeah, so you asked me an original question. I didn't know if I was supposed to respond to Les first or answer your question, but you asked me an
whatever you feel like.
Well, I guess one quick thing I'll say to Les there is it is true that once humans are gone, there is no one around anymore to make that moral judgment as to whether something is a net good or not. But in the same vein, if you have a room of lots of tiny children suffering in some way, maybe they're all wearing some sort of suit with spikes on, and as they this may sound ridiculous, but as they're walking around, they're poking and jabbing each other and they're in pain. Well, as soon as the adults leave the room, then there is no one in that room to make the moral judgment as to whether that situation is bad or not. And so I think maybe the analogy between that and nature is fairly obvious. So I would say, just because humans have gone, if humans did go extinct and the sort of moral reasoners of the universe were no longer gone, it doesn't change the state of what is actually going on in nature. And so if we make the judgment now that nature is a net negative, or it is this sort of hellish existence, which I would agree with Mark, and I know you don't agree with, but if we've come to that conclusion while we exist, it still exists after we're gone. And the only other maybe thing I would reply is maybe this is just because of the country I've grown up in, but I would say, at least in the UK, and I would guess this is the same for other sort of more industrialized countries, is that I feel like we have more of a rose-tinted view of nature rather than us sort of focusing on the negatives. I think we focus on the positives. As an example, I'll give the famous documentaries by David Attenborough. I would say those are rose-tinted. I don't want to say propaganda, because he's not intentionally trying to do this stuff, but it is just a rose-tinted view of reality. So if you watch his documentaries, he uses nature to tell stories about winners and losers, but always focuses on the winners. And whenever there is a loser, there's a quick cut to another scene, or it's quickly skimmed over, or the person sitting watching this documentary goes, oh, that's sad, but forgets about it 5 minutes later.
Right.
But when they go into the office the next day, they'll be telling everyone about, oh, I saw this amazing documentary last night, blah, 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 even though they've just literally witnessed a mass massacre often. So I would maybe push back on that slightly, that at least in the country I've grown up in, people have a very rose-tinted view of nature, I would say.
Yes, I think you're right. And some people call it eco-porn because, it's only the really sexy stuff. Like I've shown a lot of them in classes, and they're fascinating, but they definitely cut out anything that is, well, for example, I saw one of a seabird feeding its chick a sardine. And I'm sure that during their filming, one of those seabirds fed their chick a disposable lighter. That's not going to get in the amazing Earth things, And so they're painting a completely false image of what nature is like, and the camera always heads in the direction of the woods and not turning around to get the road. So and you're right, it does skew people's view of the natural world, and maybe I'm thinking too along the lines of antinatalists and people of our ilk who do see the suffering. Maybe most people don't. They imagine cute little cuddly tiger cubs and so on. So that could be true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you were to get an ethicist to narrate a David Attenborough documentary, people would come away from it with a very different understanding of what had happened. Yeah. I remember he's released a new series recently called Perfect World, I think, and he focuses on different things about the natural world. And I saw one of them, and I can't remember what it was to do with, but there was a scene of turtles had laid thousands of eggs along this sandy embankment, and the day came where the little, I don't know what baby turtles are called, maybe I do, but I'm just forgetting, but these baby turtles, they hatch and they're going towards the water, and the story was told as if this was somehow a success story, that against all the odds, the camera focuses on one baby turtle getting to the water, surrounded by dead bodies of other baby turtles who had drowned, or maybe they were just too weak or something like this. Right. And I just thought, how morally deluded is our society, where we watch that, you go, that one turtle, this is such a good thing, and we just ignore all of the sort of carcasses lying around it, which obviously doesn't just happen for turtles. There are many species that reproduce like that, right? But they don't get in the spotlight in these documentaries, right? Yeah, kind of like the hero soldier in the war. They make it through and everybody else is dead behind them. Well, never mind about them. Let's give this hero a welcome. But that is how our positive bias. It is a skewed view of the world.
Why is it bad when it happens to humans, but not bad when it happens to wild animals? Let's go for less. So, for example, that analogy that you used, right? And then Lawrence used the turtle example.
Yes.
Well, if nature is having the same outcome, why is there a difference there?
Well, we know better.
Okay.
Yeah, they just do what they've done for hundreds of millions of years. Those turtles have been around since before the dinosaurs.
But outcome-wise, it's similar, right?
It's what?
Outcome-wise, in terms of the experience, it's still similar.
It's still dead.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah, the spark of life that all three of us have is exactly the same one that came from the first bacteria. And if we don't procreate, that spark of life that's been passed on unextinguished for billions of years is going to go. Tragic.
You do see that as a tragic thing?
No, not at all. I think
Okay.
I like being a terminal bud on my family tree.
Okay. Okay. Were there any other points that you wanted to address?
I maybe wanted to bring up one more thing, but I didn't know it. Les, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I don't.
So one thing that I wanted to say, which was going back to Les was talking about, maybe the way that we see animals in nature and want to sort of paternalize them is maybe the same way that, the colonizer used to do to the colonized. I wanted to just sort of go off that, but make a more general point, is that I think that analogy is not quite accurate, because it's not comparing like to like. Because if you imagine a colonizer going, to the to be colonized group of people, when we imagine that group of people, we imagine them to be, they have their own way of life that they've carved out, and they try to reduce their own suffering, etc., etc. They're not particularly they're not eating themselves. They probably have a stable food source, stuff like this. We have this sort of picture in, and then we see the colonizer as this sort of evil, or maybe just naive paternalizer that comes along and often subjugates them, because of the history of colonization. We sort of have this negative view of it. But I don't think that directly maps onto what we would be doing with animals, because at least for what I would advocate for, we would be coming at it from a completely compassionate place, where all we want to do is benefit those who we are interfering in the business of. And also, it's not like we would be arriving, to this area where animals are, and they would have carved out their food source, and these animals would not be living in the same conditions that maybe a human society that had been colonized would be. These animals would be being torn apart, constantly on their guard in nature. Many of their children would die, things like this. And so, just to zoom out one more level, I feel like what's often useful, at least when I explain it to people, is imagine everything going on in nature and all of the sort of harms that wild animals come across. Swap all of those animals out for humans, and I think we would take the moral issue a lot more seriously, and we would say, no, we actually are duty bound to go over there and help those people. I think it's the fact that because they're other species, we see it as less important. But at least for me, species is not a relevant characteristic by which to disregard or lower anyone's interests in their importance.
Yes. So what do you think about the distinction between domesticated species and wild species?
Do you mean in our duties towards them?
Yeah, I guess that'd be the main thing I see anyway. And we're the direct cause of their suffering.
Yeah, so I do see that there is a difference, because one is we have caused the suffering. The other one is we're observing the suffering. So with domesticated animals, I say, we stop breeding them into existence. The issue goes away altogether. With wild animals, it's more complicated, because we're observing their suffering. We're not necessarily the cause of it, although we are the cause of some wild animal suffering.
True. Yes, we are.
Yeah. So I would say with wild animals, I would go back to the analogy I used before, is that even though we may not have pushed that young child into the lake, if we observe them in the lake and we have the capacity to help them, then I believe we have somewhat of a moral duty to go then and help them. I'm not sure, I've never studied philosophy or anything like that, so I can't put it in more sort of articulate terms. But if we see that child in the lake struggling, and we know they're going to be struggling for a long time, even if we walk away, we should, if we have the capacity, go help them. And if we don't have the capacity, we should make it our duty to try and find that capacity and then go help them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, because they're human. We know full well what they're going through, and we do have, I think, a moral obligation to do something about it. So this is where the distinction, this is probably where you and I have a difference. We both agree we shouldn't create more domesticated species like ourselves and our food animals. But then you're taking it one step further into the wild non-human animals, and I don't go that far. So
if there was a drowning deer, would either of you intervene?
Well, yeah. Sorry, Les.
Oh no, I would. You were going to say that you would.
Yeah. I would. I mean, I'm
but wait,
sure.
wait, Les. Why would you intervene if it's not human? Like,
because quite likely we had a hand in it being in its drowning. In the natural world all by itself, it probably wouldn't be in that lake that we created. Or
what about wild fires? Would you say a koala, or I don't know, some animal stuck in a wildfire that we didn't cause?
Yeah. Well, the wildfires are because of us controlling fires and not allowing them to run their natural course, and so now they are devastating. And yeah, where we have interfered, like in the koala habitat, we need to try to ameliorate the situation as best we can.
Okay. Is there any situation, as a thought experiment, where we did not cause the animal to be in that situation where it would suffer? For example, if they were starving, if they were thirsty, if they were, if they had, I don't know, if they were struck by a poisonous, if they were poisoned by a snake or something like that, or is there any type of distress that an animal would face where we could help, or is it that all these situations would be human induced somehow?
Yeah, Komodo dragons will take down a water buffalo, and it takes about a week. And so the water buffalo suffers tremendously. And I saw a documentary on that. I don't know if it was David Attenborough, but the people filming it were just really emotionally distraught because they knew this was what they were coming to document, and it is what happens in the wild. And for them to chase off the Komodo dragon and clean up the Cape buffalo and save its life, they wanted to, because they really felt for that animal. Now, should they have? Of course, they would get fired. They were there to document its death. And the Komodo dragon was just doing what they've done for, millions of years. So that is a real dilemma. Should we interfere in that, or should we not? Maybe then a Komodo dragon will die a horrible starvation if we didn't let them eat a buffalo. So when we interfere, there's ramifications we may not be clear on.
But there's sometimes situations where it's just fighting, right? Like it's not for eating the animal. It's just a defense. So if someone's fighting and then they're left to die, other than, say, scavengers, there's just this being that suffers for a long time. Would we not have a responsibility or to help out? Or
you mean a big rock to the head so they didn't suffer more?
Yeah, that, or whatever else we can do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to push this idea of responsibility. and the distinction between helping humans but not helping non-humans. But at the same time, you already crossed the species barrier when you said helping domesticated animals. So there's a distinction between domesticated and wildlife because we are the cause of the domestication. At the same time, historically, domestication was a sort of it happened in conjunction with societies. It wasn't that we, put them in a lab and force bred them. We do that. We force breed certain animals, yes. But the history of domestication isn't exactly like that, right?
Not yet. Oh.
So if there's this type of symbiotic relation between wildlife domestication and our us as animals, I'm trying to understand why we have no responsibility to wild animals.
I think we only have as much responsibility as we whenever we have interfered, as I was saying. If we have interfered with an ecosystem and we can try to ameliorate what we've done, then yes, we have an obligation to. But if it's on its own, I don't like seeing mallards group accosting a female mallard, but we're not going to chase them away. Stop that. That's not nice. There's no consent.
Can I was just going to quickly, I maybe wanted to put forward a sort of, because I think the whole idea of responsibility, maybe the difference that, maybe the difference in our thinking stems from crossing the species barrier somewhat, because I know that the distinction that I'm making, I think the distinction that Les is making is between the suffering that we're responsible for and the suffering we're not responsible for.
Yes.
But I think that, at least as far as I understand it, I think, Les, you maybe make that distinction because they are not humans. And so let me take an example, but put it in a human context and see your reaction. So let's say we roll the clock back a few hundred years and we, maybe even 1,000 years, and we get to the point where, we're in a world where we're not as interconnected as we are today. And so it may be very likely that, if one civilization sets sails to a faraway land, they come across another civilization that they've never interacted with before. And, they have no hand in how that civilization is in its current state. Now, if I set sail from my civilization and I have, I have food, I have water, I have all these things, and I come across another civilization that has been going through an extremely bad drought over the past season. I've never seen these people before. I've never interacted with them. I've never even been within 2,000 miles of them. But I come across them and their children are dying. They are suffering. They're becoming malnourished. Do I not now have a duty to share my resources with them and help them as much as I can? Because I feel like that is the analogy with nature, is that, even though there were other species that, even though there are wild animals that, evolved along with us, there are many ways they suffer that we have no hand in. We didn't cause it.
Right.
But, now that we do see it and we are aware of it and we see it and we have somewhat of a capacity, or we can develop a capacity to help them, should we not do that? Just like if we found another human civilization that was suffering, we should help them.
We would be obligated to try, but I think looking at the bigger picture, the moral thing to do, scientific thing to do, would be not to do anything, because here's some water, and then the water, of course, had some pathogens that we carried from the old. We were drinking out of it, and we have syphilis, or we would inadvertently spread diseases that we didn't even realize we had, as colonizers did. So our best intentions quite often would, I don't know how we could not try to help them out, right? They're starving and dying of thirst. But in the long run, we could easily do far more damage to those people, that civilization, than if we just turned around and left.
Is that not more of an argument for being considered in the way that we help them rather than not helping them at all?
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
So I do understand your point about the fact that, you know, in theory, whilst we should help them, in practice, the way we carry it out may cause more harm than good.
Yes, correct.
I totally agree with that.
Uh-huh.
But I think that is more of an argument for being considered in the way that we help them, rather than just not helping them at all. And let me give you an example. When the Americans came across the concentration camps with the Jews and other people inside, many were so malnourished that when they were liberated, they died when they started eating food and drinking water again.
Right.
Would that be an argument not to help them, or would that be an argument to, you know, do research, learn and develop our capacity, then be better suited to help those in need rather than not help them at all?
Sure. Right. And we do need to try to fix our ignorance about everything, but especially in that case, if there was a doctor there, he said, wait a minute, don't do that. Easy. And it's also the same with, as we were talking about in the natural world, we don't really know enough to actually make things better for them. And maybe we should learn and try to do better by them.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think we agree there.
I'd like to go a little, if there are no other points, I'd like to move on to another topic, if you don't mind.
That'd be fine with me.
I'm fine with that. Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, I've got no sort of time that I need to finish, so I'm fine to.
Okay. So it's more of, I'd like to talk about the state of antinatalism as a social movement, as a maybe not really as a philosophy, but more as like an activist kind of thing, particularly with Anti-natalism International and actually the Exploring Anti-natalism podcast. I'd like to hear any observations less that you have of the representation of anti-procreative ethics when it comes to all the people that you've heard on the podcast, and also the representation within Anti-natalism International. What are some of your thoughts and feelings on that?
I think it's wonderful. Yeah, I think it's has had a far greater success as far as reaching people than VHEMT ever has. And I've been at this for decades. It really resonates with people. I think it's because it's a philosophy, and people can think about it and decide, think about it in the nutshell. Whereas VHEMT, you can be child-free, concerned about non-human animal suffering, all sorts of things. And so it's kind of a mishmash, and it's just an idea. A practical, impractical idea that, okay, we stop procreating and we go extinct and everything is different. But with antinatalist, it really gives a far more cohesive attack, I guess, on natalism, a challenge to it anyway. And so if somebody says, oh, that's ridiculous, what? I say, well, okay, disprove it. I don't need to prove antinatalism. I just want to hear you say why it's okay for us to create somebody today who you know is going to suffer, especially considering the future. It's not what it used to be.
Lawrence, how about yourself?
About the sort of image that antinatalism has generally, and
that could be part of it, but also the direction that if there is even a direction, of where we're tending to go as a, it's not really one group, but we're all doing our projects and we're working to something, not really sure the destination, but just how it's going right now, the present moment, with all these groups, all these philosophies, and what you're working on as well, and what you've heard on, say, the podcast. Like, how do you see? What's your observation about the state of affairs currently?
I think it's harder for someone like myself to comment, just because I've not been engaged with the, however you want to call it, the community, the movement, as long as many other people. But from what I've seen so far, I think, and I may have this completely wrong just because of my lack of, time engaging, but I feel like the community generally has been very inward facing. So if anyone manages to penetrate in, and if anyone manages to find the philosophy and penetrate in, they can engage with the community. But it doesn't seem like the community is, or has been, I don't want to say it hasn't been interested in doing it, but it doesn't seem like it's had much of an outward facing effort, or whatever you call it. And in some respects it has, obviously VHEMT was very much outward facing and trying to, get attention and have people, come and learn. There's also organizations like Child Free India. But it seems like, at least to me, a lot of people, and people are welcome to do what they want, obviously, but it seems like a lot of people are still, just discussing in Facebook groups or on Discord servers and things like this. And I don't blame people. In every part of the world, it's a very stigmatized philosophy. But I feel like at least now we're getting to the point where we need to start being more outward facing. And I don't know if I have the sort of the credentials to say that, given my lack of experience engaging with the community. But it seems to me that we sort of need to start, trying to translate our ideas into actually having an impact a lot more. Now the way we do that is going to be, is going to be very diverse, and it should be very diverse, because different things are going to reach different people. But yeah, I guess that I don't know if that was in any sense coherent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're both more optimistic than I am, and I don't like taking a pessimistic approach to things, just socially, because I'm usually a cheerful guy. Philosophically, I feel like there's so much disagreement, right? Like when someone's like, okay, what is antinatalism? And they find out about Chris Korda, and they find out about Lawrence, and they find out about Les, and they find out about Amanda. We disagree philosophically, right? Like, that's pretty obvious. Is that, like, we can agree on that? In terms of our grounding of how we see the world, of where, if there was, some people go further to say we have an obligation to destroy the world, right? So, like, it's really hard for me. And I've talked to other people about this, and they say, just like with any community or any group that you label yourself with, you have to communicate the nuance of disagreement so that you can talk about what you believe in. I agree with that. I get it. At the same time, when I go into, say, the child free movement, and even when I talk to Nina Paley about this, some of the conversation when she started within that movement, it was very self-centered. It was about, well, why would I have a kid when I can have my nice cars and my big house, and it's all about this travel experience. That is so not what I think of, right? Like, when I think about anti-procreative ethics, and I think about the harm of coming into existence, and I think about even the violation of rights and consent of a being, I'm not thinking about, well, I want to be in this nice, expensive luxury apartment and my life is so great. Like, that to me is like, I can't align myself with that. At the same time, we are. Inevitably, we are. When I make a descriptive claim about the nature of reality, and particularly nature, wild animal suffering, and I see it as a hellish existence, and then some people are like, well, we don't know the state of suffering and whether or not we can say whether or not this is a good or bad thing, then again, the consequences may be minimal in terms of talking to the public, but this is still not what I believe, right? And it's still not what you believe either. I'm not trying to say one is right or the other. I'm just trying to say that there's a disagreement in some of these views. And then when antinatalists and atheists are talking, the atheists are talking about, we do have a responsibility to bring the end of the world. And then the antinatalists are like, no, it's much more pessimistic that any intervention that we do, we screw it up. So what we can do is on a personal level, not bring more beings into existence to suffer and die. That's the best that we can do. At least that's my interpretation, and I understand there's multiple interpretations. And I guess this is my pessimism in this whole group, so to speak, is that there's so much differences. How do we have a uniformed movement when we all disagree on these fundamental levels? In my opinion, I think every time I talked about this with other people, they're like, it doesn't matter as long as people don't procreate. We're all in it at that point. I don't know if I agree with that. It doesn't sit well with me. What do you guys think about what I just said? I'm just speaking off the cuff.
Yeah. So I agree with you on the quick point, Mark. You were saying, some people say, well, it doesn't matter as long as they don't procreate. I agree with you. I don't think that is the right angle to take or perspective to have, because
sorry, I just want to quickly vent something to you. Like, you've been involved with the vegan movement for a while. Do you know how frustrating it is when I come across vegans who are like, oh, I'm vegan too because I wanted my skin to be clear of acne? Do you know how frustrating that is to be like, I'm in this for the animal ethics, and you're like, oh, I have no acne now, great, I'm a vegan? Like, that to me is it's frustrating. But go ahead.
So no. So I agree with you, which we actually have discussed before, Mark, but I can't remember if it was recorded. But that is one of the reasons why I don't use the term vegan anymore. So, like, obviously I, I'm still in contact with the word and stuff like that. If I'm at a restaurant, I'll say I'll have the vegan option or whatever, but I don't wear it as an identity label, because I don't see the identity label as having much point. It can be useful in things like community building, but I see it as ending up just becoming another form of identity politics and grouping people into different blocks. I feel like the ideas behind the label are much more important. And so if you can sort of pull apart the two things, it's much more useful, because, like, I, just like you do, get aggravated with people that say, oh, I'm vegan, my skin's clearing up, or, oh, I'm antinatalist, I can afford this car. If you dump the label, you can't say, oh, I'm I'm against procreation, I've got a car. Like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, how are those two things together? Someone could also say, I'm against animal exploitation, my skin's clearing up. Like, those two things don't make sense anymore, So if you remove the label and just talk about the ideas behind them, I think it makes the conversations that can be had a lot cleaner. So maybe, I don't know, there's to use the animal rights movement as an analogy, maybe this happened a lot before I was in it, but since I've been in it, there's been many sort of forms of identity politics in many different ways. And when I say identity politics, often it's associated with, identity in terms of like sex or race or something like that. But when I say it in the animal rights movement, I mean more just like people who identify themselves with different labels and, different factions and stuff like that. And I feel like the more identity politics, which ultimately just comes from seeing yourself as part of one group and seeing everyone else as part of another group, which I think labels encourage.
Mhm.
I think the more identity politics gets into a movement, the more that movement is going to struggle to progress. The animal rights movement is constantly having fights with itself. It seems like it's become more of a drama machine than a movement. Hopefully that doesn't happen with anti-procreative ethics and the people that want to further that. And so I share your concern. I don't think we can, eradicate, nor should we eradicate differences between the beliefs people have. But the way that I think we can progress is trying to avoid things like identity politics and getting so attached to labels and stuff like that. If someone comes to have a conversation with me and all they see is he's an ethicist, that comes with so much baggage. But if they just come and say, I'm going to have a conversation with Lawrence because he has a particular opinion on this issue, it comes with less baggage. They can just talk to me about the beliefs I have and the views I have and the values I have. And it doesn't have to be clouded by all these labels and stuff like that. And the last thing I'll say is I'm not blind to any of the benefits labels bring. They do help in some ways. I just feel like I've become much more sort of like pessimistic about them recently because the issues that at least I perceive that they bring with them. So I mean that maybe that was a whole load of nothing, and maybe it didn't even answer the question, but that's what I have to say.
Thanks.
No, I think I really agree with you, Lawrence. As soon as you take on a label, you take on whatever the person you're talking to imagines. Like say, I'm an anarchist. Oh, so you want to blow things up? Well, no, look. And so you don't want to take on a label, and yet I say, well, I favor an anarchistic approach, an anti-authoritarian approach, and then we can get into some differences of opinion on that. But I think we have to be careful not to get too hung up on why somebody believes something and reject them because they don't. Like in environmentalism, people are always saying for our children and our children's children and our grandchildren. I think, aren't there any adults in this future you're working towards?
Yeah.
So all you care about is humans or children, actually. So instead of saying that's a pretty short-sighted, homocentric, what about nature? We're all working towards a better world, and we have different approaches. And I think Anti-natalism International could have problems if everybody is saying, no, you need to do it for this reason. I don't think you have the right reasons, and we need to be far more inclusive and understanding of people's differences. I mean, even vegan, not people eating a plant-based diet for different reasons. Well, at least they're not eating animals, I mean, yeah, that's not my reason for not eating animals, and the same with procreation. If somebody doesn't procreate, I don't care why they don't procreate. They're not adding another one of us to suffer and cause suffering.
So you bring up something very interesting about not saying like this is the only way as Anti-natalism International, but at the same time, so within the year we're going to do more conversations with the board of Anti-natalism International, and I'm going to foresee that they will disagree on some of these philosophies, right?
Sure.
So how does someone say, I disagree with VHEMT or child-free or ethilism or a form of antinatalism, while also saying the organization doesn't say that? Because you guys are kind of representations of the organization, are you not?
This is for me, right?
Well, even like if whatever, like just in general, like as a principle, if you're part of an organization and you speak about your personal beliefs about your philosophy and you actually think that this is wrong, if you think child-free is actually wrong, if you think that VHEMT is actually wrong, or you think ethilism is actually wrong, then by extension, I feel like as a PR thing, you're I understand on the website it says you're not the spokesperson for antinatalism, but I mean I feel like it's hard not to when you're like, you know what I mean? Like it's like, well, I'm a co-founder of this organization to promote antinatalism. I think these things are wrong. but the organization doesn't. So like I don't know how you rectify those two things.
No, I get what you mean. And it's not a perfect thing. And it will be a hard line to straddle to maintain the distinction between the organization and the individuals within it, or the individuals within it and the organization. I'm not saying that's going to be an easy thing. I'm also not saying that we set up the organization in the most perfect way. Maybe we've set it up in a way where we are going to hit roadblocks like that, that get us into, complications or hot water or something like that. At least for me, it's my first time setting up an organization. Well, okay, like an organization this big anyway. And so to be honest, I agree with you, and I foresee that might become an issue. I don't know entirely how to address it, but it's just something. Maybe this isn't a satisfying answer, but no, I recognize it as an issue, and it's something we're going to have to tackle in the future. I don't know what the best way is going to be, but yeah.
I would recommend keeping the manifesto as short as possible if it's put on a bumper sticker.
This was our idea when we were first setting it up. The basic idea that we often had is that the organization itself wants to the downward pressure that the organization puts on the people within it wants to be as little as possible to allow for as much diversity within the organization as possible, association with the organization wants to be have as little prescriptions as possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you are part of like a normal general company somewhere that comes with a whole load of prescriptions when you're a representative of it, or if someone hears, I volunteer or work for that organization. But with Annie, I think our general idea is that we want it to sort of be as slim in its prescriptions as possible. We have the base foundations that we all share, which is we're against procreation. And we do different things along different themes to, try and further the cause of lowering procreation, or, reducing it, or whatever the right wording is. But but we want to allow for as much sort of diversity in philosophy or thinking as possible.
I think that's a recipe for success. If people get into too much specifics, they'll just be, and it's fun to do that as we're doing right now, but we're doing it on a philosophical friendly level. We're not saying, no, you're wrong and you're going to have to get out of this organization until you start thinking right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So like this is where I get to put on my my optimism hat, where I think whenever I see these types of disagreements, my first initial reaction is, let's talk, let's meet up and let's chat about it, instead of this type of tribalism that tends to happen, like you can't be part of it or just get out kind of thing. It's just like, well, let's chat about it, and I'm hoping that contributes, but I'm really happy that we had a sit down and you both had a conversation about this. So I'm happy with this discussion. Are you guys happy with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know, Mark, maybe you were the one who sort of set it up, but thanks, Les, for reaching out.
Oh yes.
I often find that I can't remember who said it, but someone I read a quote by someone once, and I'm going to completely butcher it, but it was along the lines of a lot of the thinking that people do, the average person does, is in conversation with people and bouncing stuff off of each other. And so when you have a conversation about something, you sort of refine your own views on it. And I felt like I've somewhat done that in this conversation. So, thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter, Les was like, "Oh, I'd like to talk to Lawrence about some of this," and I'm like, "Oh, well, let's do it." And I reached out to both of you. Yeah.
Really.
Was there anything else that either of you would like to address or talk about before we wrap up?
Thank you for not reading.
Okay. Do you want to plug your websites?
Do you want to go first, Les?
VHEMT.org. Yeah.
And just antinatalisminternational.com. I don't have any other websites. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you both again for coming on the channel, and I'm going to release this right away. So, all right. So have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
Take
Mark.
care. All right. Ciao. Bye.
Yes.